Okay, so this is the part of my story where I met my husband, and during that ride had my first major spiritual experience. Sort of, yeah, one of the first pivotal moments that put me onto the trajectory to lead me to where I am now. And really, I just feel like it was, when I look back at all these things, I can just see how my life and the universe was preparing me for what I'm going through now. Like, I've had multiple different experiences that have progressed my awakening, sort of like quantum leaps, I guess. So today I'm just going to talk about the first one. So I'll refer to my husband as my karmic, just to keep his identity protected. And when I say my husband was my husband. So, I mean, we are still legally married and living together, but our relationship has ended, and at the moment I've got very small children, so I just need to wait sort of to find a way that's going to be financially manageable, to find a better living situation for us all, so that we can go our separate ways but allow the children to have easy access to their mum and their dad. So I met my karmic when I was a child. So I was just 16 years old, and I had experienced a lot of rejection from boys through high school, and I wasn't really looking, and I went along to a friend's elder brother's birthday party at some country club, and there was a bit of a funny situation where I had been over at my best friend's house a lot, and I was over there so much that sometimes they would all be out and for some reason I'd just be there by myself. And on one of those occasions I walked into the lounge room, and there was this guy sitting in the lounge room, and we awkwardly sort of said hi, and then I walked away. And when my friend got home, I asked her who that guy was, and she had no idea. And I thought that was a little bit weird. It was weird enough that I was over there when they weren't all home, but to have somebody else over there who I'd never met, yeah, I thought that was weird. So she didn't know who it was, and months went by and I never saw this guy around. And then I went to this birthday party, and I looked across the hall, and he was standing there with his family, and I just stood up and I went, "Oh, that's him," to her. And my friend said, who's him? Like, ooh, who's this guy? And then I don't know, I was just in a silly mood. So I said, oh, just him, it's just him. And my friend knew what I was talking about, and she said, oh, that's just the guy that lives down the road. That's my elder brother's best friend. And all my other friends though wanted to know how I knew him, why I was pointing him out, all this stuff. So just pulling their leg and just being in a silly sort of playful mood, I kept sort of egging them on, about the mystery of who this guy was. And then I went up, and I was just to sort of play a joke on my friends, I was sort of talking to him and pretending like I knew him, and my friends were all wondering what was going on. And then he got kind of freaked out by me and ran off, and he went off to where the pokies are, so I wasn't able to cross that line because I was under 18. And so he just sat there playing the pokies. And then at the end of the night, it was funny because we were all leaving, and I realised that through joking to my friends, somehow I just got a bit of a crush on him. And I went and told him, and he was very drunk, and he sort of gave me a kiss on the cheek. Yes, yes, little girl. Oh, here we go. Here's a kiss. Mwah. Good night. And he went home. And then later, I just kept thinking about him. And so my friend, she was very controlling, and she kind of used me as her entertainment, really. And so she said, okay, you got to write him a letter. And you see, she'd always done that to me. Anytime she knew that I had a thing for a guy, she would make me write some embarrassing letter, and she'd say, don't worry, we're not going to give it to him. It's just write what you would say if you were going to tell him that you liked him. And then she was awful, and she would just grab these notes and run up and give them to the boy, who of course would be totally freaked out, and then I would just face this humiliation and rejection. And so but this girl, she was very, very controlling, and it was kind of like whatever she said, me being this insecure teen who didn't know what she was doing, didn't know how to stick up for herself, would very easily be manipulated by this friend. And so she said, come on, I think he liked you. Let's just write a note, and then you got to give it to him. You got to. And so I did that. And then he actually wrote back and said, wow, I didn't know you were serious. Like, we could meet up, hang out if you wanted. And so we did. We took his dog for a walk. He only lived down the street from my best mate's house, so I was there all the time. And so we went out, and yeah, we kind of both just liked hanging out. So that was it. We kind of just kept hanging out, and then that was it. We became a little couple. And so that was my final year, I think, in high school. Maybe it was year 11. And then I had my final year in high school. And then I wanted to start music college, and he was already doing uni down in the city. So we decided that for me, I lived up the top of the mountains, and it was a really long trek into the city. So I wanted to move down to the city, and so we decided that we'd go flatting with my best friend. And so we moved out, and basically, it was a very, very turbulent relationship. We fought like crazy, but yet we always kept coming back to one another. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone again. After dealing with so much rejection, I just thought, like, I've got one now. I can't let this go. I can't let this go. And I've always been a very, like, extremely determined person, and so I like to see things through. I always figure there's going to be a way to make something work, and I just believe in working at it and working it out. So we stuck together, even though everything was just horrendously rocky. I had become extremely mentally ill, and a doctor had put me on the medication, antidepressant Zoloft, and it actually made me a lot worse. And so I felt really, really out of control, and I had something called, through my own research, I realized was called banging head syndrome, and which I later also figured out by meeting other people who had gone on that same awful drug, that this is a very common side effect for that drug. And so I would hear crashing and all sorts of, like static and crackling in my head. It felt awful, like, I don't know, some sort of electrical fault in my brain. And sometimes I'd be lying there and suddenly I'd hear this crash, almost like, if you can imagine, like a, like a huge heavy metal sheet just falling down in a huge, concrete floored factory, and it echoing through it, just this enormous sound. And I would startle up and wonder where that sound came from. It was like as if it had to be out there, and it was so loud, and it would have shaken me through my whole being. And then I'd realize that it was in my head. And so we would fight and fight and fight. We had all this stuff going on, and I thought I was the really unstable one, that he had to put up with me. And anytime I was having an emotional breakdown and being needy, he would disappear. And he used to not come home, and I couldn't reach him on his phone. And he'd come in at like 3 in the morning, super drunk and pissed off, and he'd never tell me where he'd been. And that drove me completely nuts. And so yeah, basically he was just really emotionally unavailable. He came from a family where particularly his mum drilled it into him that boys do not have feelings, and that if you even hint that you are not coping or that you are going through something, it's, oh, poor diddums, poor little princess. So to him it was very, very shameful to enter into the world of emotions at all. So like he couldn't even recognize what he was feeling, and so he would never open up about what was going on in his world. And then I was just a total mess. And I remember I would do things to try to get to him to acknowledge my hurt. And at the time, I believed it was him making me hurt. And I mean, he triggered off all my abandonment issues and rejection issues. I spoke about in the video about my family history that my parents weren't there a lot. I felt abandoned a lot. In fact, one day when I was 2, my dad, or 2 or 3, something like that, my dad was driving in the car and I was pestering him for something, and he lost it. He would just switch into these awful cold moods, and he just pulled over the car, threw open the door and just threw me out onto the pavement. And I tried to get back into the car, but he blocked my way and then just pushed me down onto the pavement again, and he jumped in the car and just sped off, and that was it. He was out of sight. And I was tiny, and this was probably the first time I'd ever been alone, like out in sort of a public area. And you know, as a small child, that's terrifying, and particularly because it happened under such emotionally fueled circumstances. And you know, being tiny, I had no idea. I believed him that he'd said that was it. I could stay there, and that was it. He was going and he wasn't coming back. And it was probably only a few minutes and he came back to get me, but in those moments I was terrified. And I remember looking around and I didn't know whether I should go and knock on a door, but then I thought, who might live in there? That might be somebody who's going to hurt me. And I remember thinking I wouldn't know how to tell anybody how to get home. So that was like an extremely traumatic moment in my childhood. And so, of course, I then go on to attract a partner who is emotionally unavailable and who just runs, just abandons me anytime I start to get emotional. And so, and that then gave me a very anxious, needy sort of attachment style. And so I would do things like, I remember one night we were fighting, and we would just fight and fight and fight because I wanted him just to acknowledge that he was hurting me, or just that I was hurting. And he didn't want to acknowledge that. And his thing was that if he ignored me, which I guess is something his parents would do, he thinks if he ignored me long enough, I would just shut up and the problem would go away, which that was not how it worked out. And I would push more and more and more because I wanted that acknowledgement more and more and more, and I felt more and more and more unacknowledged. And so I remember like one night to try and get some attention, I ran out the front of our apartment and I was knocking on the window, and he was telling me to come back inside. And to create drama, I started taking off my clothes, and he just got the shits and, you know, pulled the blinds back shut and just went back to bed because it was too much for him. And then I was just like distraught, and so I walked off down the street in the middle of you know, part of Western Sydney, 15 minutes away from, you know, the heart of Sydney City. And it's like 1 a.m. and I'm walking down the street. I mean, luckily there's not many people around, but I was like, I don't know, in my undies and maybe no top at all, and just crying my eyes out. And I got up to this intersection to where our street ended, and it kind of met one of the main roads, and this car comes around the corner, and it's a bunch of young men, and they had their music going, and I just hear them wind down the window and start wolf whistling, and one of the blokes goes, "Get her, bring her into the car." And suddenly I realized, like, I was in danger, and I quickly ran and just hid behind a tree. I didn't know what the hell to do. It was dark at least, and so I hid behind this tree, but I just thought, shit, like, they're gonna know where I am. And then at that point I heard a police siren, and these guys all just go, shit, get in the car. And they slammed the doors and they sped off, and then this police car goes zooming after them. And so I just ran home, and now I kind of look back at that and go, wow, I must have been protected in some way, but how lucky. And so we lived in the city for a while, and then once I finished my college degree in music, I just assumed that we would keep living in the city, and sort of just, you know, experience life a little bit. I'd get a job and maybe look at, I wanted to be a musician, so I wanted to look at traveling with a band, or just at least doing gigs around the city and things. But when we were up visiting his parents, they said, "Oh, you'd be nuts to keep paying rent. Like, now you don't need to be down the city for college. You guys should just like move home for a bit so that you can save up to buy your own place, because why would you want to be paying somebody else's mortgage off when you could be investing in owning property yourself?" And things were getting tough, and so they thought they were giving us, you know, good advice. And being closed off to my intuition now, I didn't listen to myself at all. I just went, oh, somebody external, they know what they're doing so much more than little old me would ever know. And so we just did that. We moved home. My Karmic wasn't actually finished his uni degree, but it was less far for him to travel than for me when I was doing college. So we moved back, and we had this plan that we were going to save up for 2 years, and then put down a good deposit on a house, get the stamp duty covered and all of that. And so I got a horrible little job being a music teacher up near my parents' place. I would have liked to have stayed with my Karmic, but his mum absolutely hated me and just bullied me like crazy. She had her own crazy trauma, and so the way that she viewed women was that they needed tough love, otherwise they were gonna go out of control. And so I'd go and visit him, and sometimes, you know, during all my crazy mental illness, I would be really, really suicidal, and I would do things like start cutting myself, and then I would grab like a needle and thread, start sewing up these cuts, and I would just be in so much emotional pain that it was almost like I'd lost feeling in my body. And I remember multiple times her coming in during these episodes, and her response was just basically the whole, oh, poor Diddums, oh, are we hurting ourselves, are we? And then she'd just be like, get into the real world, love, and slam the door on us. And for a girl who felt like a burden on the world and who thought like nobody cared about her, that was like huge confirmation of those ridiculous beliefs. And so I really went even further downhill, and I'd been begging the doctor to help get me off Zoloft because I knew it was making me worse. But this doctor was a bit of a psychopath, and she kept saying, no, you can't come off Zoloft just willy-nilly, like you need a plan. And then she's like, but I feel that you need to be on it, so I'm going to keep you on it for another 6 months, and then in 6 months you can come back and you can tell me how you're going, and then we'll reassess. And I was like, no, I can't be on this stuff for that long. I need to come off now. Please give me a plan. And I was scared. Like she said people kill themselves if they just come off this cold turkey or at the wrong pace. So it's really important that you have a care plan to come off this. And I just gave all my power away, and I was so vulnerable, and so I didn't know what to do. I was just scared. And so eventually I just it basically made me like go into this weird like sort of dissociative state where I felt so awful and just spun out. Like my mind wasn't my own anymore, and I thought the whole world was just like playing a trick on me, and I thought everybody had to be robots. I couldn't feel the humanness or the soul in anybody anymore. And then I thought, I just felt like such a victim. I felt like this was this cold make-believe world that was all sort of designed just to humiliate and hurt me. And I remember just looking at people and trying to see under their skin like how the mechanics of the robot were working. And eventually it all got too much, and I'd been in this awful job where I had these bosses who were just absolute psychopaths. And so one day I really got very suicidal, and I wanted to dive off the balcony there down this sort of 3 or 4 meter, probably 4 or 5 meter drop. And I rang my Karmic and told him what I was going to do, and he just freaked out and said, do you think I have time for this shit? And he threw his phone down, and then that was it. I think he broke his phone. I couldn't contact him after that. And then just as I was about to jump, my neighbour was running across and called out to ask me what the hell I was doing, and I was really embarrassed. But he caught me like just at the right time, and he just had a really lovely presence. So I didn't tell him what I was doing, but there was something about him that just calmed me down, and that was that got me over the worst hurdle while I was going through withdrawal from the Zoloft. But then, yeah, I had the banging head syndrome, and that it took 10 years before that completely disappeared. And that drug just messed with my brain. So I used to be really, really good at quickly articulating what I meant, being really specific and true to what I was trying to articulate. And I lost that. I completely lost that. And then that's put anxiety into me. Every time I try to talk, I suddenly feel, oh my God, it's all going to go wrong. I'm not going to know how to say what I want to say because there's like this disconnect now. between talking and what's going on in my mind. And that's partially why I'm doing this, because I want to start to overcome that, and I want to come back to myself. I want to heal those parts of myself. And so after that incident, I was getting really, really desperate to know how our savings were going, how he was going, because he kept that all very private from me. And as I said, I was working for these psychopaths, and they made me sign this contract, and I showed it to my dad's friend who's a lawyer, and he said, yeah, that contract, like, that's the definition of slavery. It's really up to you whether you want to sign your life away or not. Like, legally they can do that, but it's up to you whether you want to sign and keep that kind of a job. And I didn't really know what else to do. There wasn't that much up where I came from in terms of work, especially in music. And so I was feeling really, really stuck. And these people, they actually they were running their business out of a house, who they purchased off my psychopathic doctor. And my psychopathic doctor used to run her surgery out of that house. And this woman, like the doctor, my mum used to also go to her, and she would say anytime she had like a mole or anything, this doctor would just get like a bit too excited and be like, oh, I'll cut it out for you if you want. And then she'd be doing it, and she would just have this like glint in her eyes while she was doing it. And she would do pap smears for us, and she would just scrape and scrape and scrape and scrape until there was blood. And then she would go, okay, good. Now I just need to go a little bit longer. And it was so painful. And yeah, she was really psychopathic. And as I said, it was like she drew energy from forcing me to stay on this drug, and she knew I was vulnerable, and it was like she enjoyed playing that. And then later I learned that there was quite a few other people going through the same thing with her, of her taking advantage of the vulnerability of her mentally unstable patients, and playing them. And so she had sold this place to this couple who were running a music school out of it. And I felt like there was something so off about these people. And but again, it was like Mum had said, just don't talk about that kind of stuff, ghosts, intuition, weird messages, all of that. So I had learned to shut that out. But sometimes this bloke would take children off into the back where their house was. They had it sort of cordoned off with just like a privacy screen at in the hallway. And I would just get the weirdest feeling about this, and he would look at me like he knew I was onto him. He would look suspicious, and then sometimes he would just like sort of give me a look like piss off, and I would just go off and like, you know, act like I hadn't seen. And then sometimes he'd just say, oh, like, that's a family friend, I was just bringing them out to show them something. And then there was a little receptionist, she was probably 14, just working at the desk there, and they had their kitchen out in the middle of where they had the rooms, where they ran the music tutoring out of. And sometimes I would walk out and she'd be sitting on the kitchen bench, and he would be like sort of hugging her and whispering to her, and it wasn't cool. Just let the bubba wake up. So yeah, there was dodgy things going on there. And it was just the most depressing place to work, because of them. I loved the children, but yeah, it was a very, very toxic, dark feeling place, because of this couple. And so I was just desperate to get out of that and just get on with whatever future I thought thought me and the Karmic were gonna buy our first home and maybe just start a family, and suffering with all my mental health issues. I also had crazy chronic fatigue, and so I had given up on the idea of trying to be a working musician, and just, yeah, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I just wanted to get on to the next thing. I just wanted to get away from there, and the plan had been to buy a home, and then I was going to see where life took me from there. But it had been a couple of years now, and as we'd been nearing that, I had been interrogating my Karmic more and more and more to let me know how much money he'd saved up. Like, if we were going to start a life together, I would have expected him to be open about his finances. And I hadn't thought much of it, but over the last few years, he had, we'd gone to visit New Zealand, and he had something about his payment from work being behind, and so could I just lend him some money to buy a plane ticket, and then he needed a computer, and it was the same sort of excuse, and then he bought a TV, and then I never really thought about the fact that he wasn't paying me back. I was kind of like, oh, whatever, like, we're saving our money together to buy a place. He's got a fairly good job starting, he was an apprentice engineer, and so I wasn't really worried about that. And I never really questioned where he was all those times that he would disappear, and all those times I couldn't reach him. But a few times I had noticed that if we went out with friends, that he would gravitate towards the poker machines. And he sort of said that sometimes he puts a little bit too much into them. But I didn't really sort of think about that too much. And then this one night I just couldn't reach him. He was gone. It was all getting too stressful. I was really, really stressed out and wanting to know what the story was. And he disappeared, and for once I thought, oh my goodness, I reckon he's gambling. But I also didn't know, because he was really, really depressed this one evening. And so I called his house, and his parents didn't know where he was, and I said that I'd been calling his phone for ages and I just couldn't get through to him, and I'd called some of his friends, they didn't know where he was. And then I said to his parents, I think he might be down at this large club gambling. And that seemed to make sense to them, that like, oh shit, he's doing that again. And so they said, oh, okay, whatever, we'll get in the car, we'll go down. This was like 2 a.m. I was completely freaking out that he wasn't okay. And then it had been ages, and I kept calling their house. And then finally they picked up again, and I said, did you find him? And they said, oh, we got halfway there, and then we went, screw him. Like, if that's what he's choosing to do, screw him. He can make his own decisions. And they went home. And to me, that was them not being able to face emotions. They were too scared to catch him in that sort of vulnerable state, which would also probably put them into a vulnerable state. And so they just abandoned him. And so things seemed to be getting worse. And then he started telling me that he definitely had money, but that he didn't know what he wanted to do with it after these 2 awful years of torture. He said, maybe I'm looking at this fancy car, maybe I'm just going to buy this fancy car. And I just was dumbstruck by that, like how we could have gone through all of this to get to the end, and for him to just be like, I don't actually know if I want to spend my life with you. I just felt really strung along. Then one evening near Christmas, we were fighting a whole lot about it, and he broke down for once. He broke down and he said, "You're going to leave me, but you need to know. You need to know what's going on." And so he opened up his computer and signed into his bank account. And at this point, here's the law of correspondence for you. I had, from the time that I had my little piggy bank as a little girl up until this point, I had saved exactly 17 grand. And I look at his bank account and the total, and it was minus 17 grand exactly. So 17 grand debt. And at first it took me a little while to understand. And then I realized, and he said, I gambled it all the way, all of it, and I'm in debt. And just to go back a little bit, just leading up to this, my mum had got this book that she'd read to help herself by a Canadian Buddhist monk called Pema Chodron, and it was called Start Where You Are. And she said, wow, this book, you just need to read it. Just read it, just read it. And so I remember reading these chapters, and I'd never heard anything like it. Just this idea. It was the first time I had heard anybody ever suggest that we are fine just as we are, and that there isn't a need for self-improvement, that everything we ever need is already right here, and that our messy bits, everything that is inherently good in us, everything that we would consider a failure or ugly or just not good enough, it's all this beautiful part of what makes us a human. And that everything that we think we need to fix or improve in our lives, we could just instead sit and accept it without any need to change it, to actually just allow ourselves to fail and to sit in the misery and the uncomfortableness and the pain, and actually lean into that and just sit with it and allow it. And somehow, as I was reading this book, I'd have these moments, like profound moments, where it was almost like my head would actually spin, and I would feel suddenly like I was dreaming. And it would be like a remembering of deep inner knowledge. But then I would close the book, go to bed, I'd get up the next morning and I'd think, wait, what was it that she was saying? It was like, it's okay to fail. And then I'd be like, no, because it's not okay to fail. I'd be like, no, that can't have been what she was saying. But whatever she was saying, like, it hit the nail on the head. But then I'd forget, and then I'd remember, and then I'd forget. And that kind of went on because it was challenging massive core beliefs for me, but with something that was just something I knew was just truth. But I'd have that amnesia, I'd go unconscious again, conscious, unconscious, conscious. And I'd reread the little sections in the book and I'd get it, but then I just couldn't bring it through into practice once my life got going again. And so in this moment, when he opened up about what was really going on, it was as if like everything that I thought was solid reality suddenly was not solid. The rug was well and truly pulled out from under my feet. There I had been for years. At this point, I think we'd been together for 5 years, and in my mind, he was the stable one, I was the unstable one. I was the one not bringing in much money, he was the one bringing in the money. And we had a plan, and we were saving, and it was going to end in this particular outcome. And then all of a sudden, right at the end, when I thought surely we are close, suddenly it was like, no, you have nothing. And I could have absolutely freaked out and broken down. It could have broken me badly. But in that moment, just suddenly, everything that I'd learnt through this Buddhist philosophy just integrated. And I was just like, oh my fucking God, the world is not solid at all. Everything that we think is solid and reality and concrete, it can just change in a second like that. Our whole reality can just be something totally else. And so I was there. It was like an out-of-body experience. It hit me so hard. And I was just filled with joy, the joy of just being. It was like I was finally, for once in my life, seeing things clearly. And I remember, like, I was touching the bed and the walls and just going, whoa, man, it feels solid, but it's not. There's like so much space in all of this. And just because it feels solid, it doesn't mean that it's really solid. That's just my perception of it with my like limited human senses. And I was just in another place. I was in spirit, in being, and the world, all the forms, like I was them. I just expanded out, and I had like this experience of just like enlightenment. And I just started laughing and laughing, and my poor Karmic had no fucking idea what was going on, and he was so confused, and he said, but you're gonna leave me? Why is this funny? This is not funny. This is awful. I'm serious. Like, that is how much debt I'm in. And through that moment of experiencing like the fluidity of reality, I realized, like, deep in my core, that this universe is one of like infinite potential. And so I thought, well, okay, so if everything had just fall apart and everything I thought I had is just gone, then just as easily we could just flip this. We can flip the reality again, and we can take on the potential that he can heal from this, and that he doesn't need to stay in that limited identity of a gambler, a gambling addict. And so, and that we can let go of the pain as well, because and just the storyline, the stories that our mind tells us that creates that pain, which then drives those addictions. And so to me, this didn't seem like an issue at all, and my perception of the world had just flipped, 180 flip, from going from wanting to kill myself, thinking I was boxed in, thinking my reality was so solid, thinking that everything, this little voice in my head was telling me about how worthless I was and how trapped I was, it was gone. And so I just said to him, no, like, I will cover all your debts. My 17 grand is going to cover your 17 grand debt, and then we're back at square one. I'm going to take over your finances for a bit just to stop you from being able to spend, and you're going to get help, and you're going to get through this. And I just 100 million% believe in you. And I had so much compassion for him, and I was so I was so touched that he had opened up for once. Finally, he was being vulnerable, and he was crying, and I didn't think he was even capable. And so everything had just changed in my reality. This closed off dude was there whimpering about what a loser he was. And I felt powerful, like I felt the power of my being, and just because I felt one with everything. So that's what I did. I covered his debts, and then I kept talking to him about getting help. And for him though, that was terrifying. And as I said, his upbringing made it so that any show of emotions was just like a huge fail and a huge weakness. And so I kept trying to get him to seek help, to just get along to a doctor and tell them what was going on so that they could refer him into a psychologist or a program or something that was going to help. Yeah, he totally resisted that. But meanwhile, I was just still like so full of belief and floating on cloud nine that everything was going to be okay now, because I felt empowered that anything was possible and that we could turn this around. And that all he needed was compassion, and that he'd shown me a bit of his true self, and that he's going to go with that and heal himself. And then we found a little first home to buy, and it was just perfect. It was just so lovely, and so we jumped at it. It hadn't taken long, ironically, after 2 years of thinking that, you know, we needed 2 years to save up for a deposit. Once I had stopped his gambling and he'd managed to finish his uni courses finally, because he wasn't just bunking off uni to go and play the pokies. So he quickly finished off uni, and then that was it. He was able to go into a full-time position as an engineer, and so he was bringing in pretty good money, and it just we managed to save up enough for a house deposit very quickly. And so we found perfect little first home, got in there, we managed to get it. And then my friend was getting married, and I was her bridesmaid, and I was kind of like, oh goodness, I would be doing things so differently. And I just wanted my chance to have a wedding and do all the planning and get all the things that I liked, because I didn't like any of her decisions. And I don't know, it was just, I felt really so much love for him at that point, because he'd opened up, and I was just in this state of complete compassion for him. And at that point I thought that I wanted to marry him. And so it seemed to make sense that if we were now settling down to buy a home, that we would just get married. And there was this venue I'd been checking out, and we just popped by it one day, just spontaneously, just dicking around really. And the venue owner said, you want to get married here? Like, it's like a 2-year waiting list. It's not going to happen for a long time. And so we went home, and we'd given this owner of this venue our details, and he just called us in a week, and he said, you know what, I've got a cancellation for next year in October. Do you guys want to take it? And I kind of just felt like, oh my goodness, everything's lining up. Yes, let's take it. So that was it. He hadn't even proposed to me, but it was like, I just took that as my cue. Let's do this. Let's go on a crazy adventure. The universe of infinite potential. Let's just get married. And so we booked that in, and then it was like, oh shit, now we've got to like organize all this stuff. So it was just full steam ahead, just organizing everything. And I had told my parents about the gambling and everything, and they were pretty freaked out. We hadn't spoken to his parents because, well, he would never speak to them about it in a million years. But my parents, my dad in particular, was really anxious about it, and he went and spoke to a few psychologists, social workers, and different people, and they just said, that's a deal breaker. Like, you've got to go. That's the kind of red flag you can't ignore. Tell her to get out of that relationship now. But Dad told me, and I said, Dad, you don't understand. Like, this is the quantum universe of infinite potential. We're going to turn this around. That's not how my story's going to end. And Dad said, well, you know what? You always have had amazing intuition. So I'm going to stand beside you and I'm going to back you. And then he offered to pay for quite a bit of the wedding. And my mum chipped in and my Karmic's parents chipped in. And it was getting closer to the wedding. And I was realizing it was quite stressful to micromanage his finances and get him lunch money when he needed it and all this sort of stuff, as well as planning this wedding. And it was a DIY wedding. I was just doing everything by myself, and anything I asked him to do, he would be really immature and he would tell me that he would do it, and then he would just sort of, like, I told him to make a bunch of lanterns for me, and he took the supplies and then he just he hid them under the bed in the spare room. And then it was right near the wedding that I was sort of doing a checklist of everything that we needed, and I realized that we didn't have the lanterns or the this or that, like the things that I had asked him to do, they weren't around. And we started fighting again, really big fighting. It was like dawning on me that just because I believed in him, he didn't believe in himself, and he didn't want to get help. He'd finally managed to go up to a doctor, and the doctor was awful and just said, you go to uni? Well, there's counsellors at uni, go book in there, this isn't my problem. And to get that response for a guy who was that intimidated about going to seek help, that was just like, he was just defeated. He just felt completely defeated, and he was like, well, fuck that, like I'm not going to try and open up again. And so yeah, he was just being still very emotionally distant again, and sort of lying. He wasn't gambling because I had all his cards and everything. But as it was getting closer to the wedding, it started hitting me hard that just because I saw the potential, maybe it didn't mean that it was going to be realized. And one night we were fighting so intensely, and I got completely overwhelmed, and I just ran out the front and just cried so hard out on my front porch, on the steps of my front porch. And this was the middle of the night, and then in that moment, this massive white owl just flew down and sat on the hand railing of the steps that I was sitting on, and we were like less than a meter away from one another. And once again, it was just like stillness, and my world stopped, and I just looked into this owl's eyes. We just stared at one another, and it was like, this was like a spirit animal coming to just like center me again. And I was just sitting there, just snapped out of my storyline and just engrossed, like in looking at this absolutely majestic animal. And then my thinking brain clicked in again and went, oh my fucking God, like there's an owl in front of me, I'm going to get my camera. And I stood up and it flew away. But anyway, I came back inside and I sort of had got myself back together, and I think it was about 3 nights to the wedding. But over those days, it was like I knew that I didn't want to do this now. But it was too late, because how could I ever change my mind now that everything was paid for? Like my parents and his parents and everybody would lose so much money, and we had put everything into making every last little trinket. And my mum had made my wedding dress. I'd spent 17 hours making these Cinderella shoes, just gluing tediously little gems and diamantes and pearls onto these shoes. We'd made tablecloths and table runners and vases and chairs. We made chairs. We just did everything. We just did absolutely everything. And it was like, how could I change my mind now? So I couldn't see a way out. But as I said, I'm the kind of person who I'm very determined, and I was like, it doesn't feel good now, but we're going to work this out. We're somehow going to work this out. But then I remember my wedding morning, and me and the bridesmaids were all putting on our makeup, and I just remember sitting there putting on my makeup, and I just looked outside, and the whole sky was clear blue, and it was like the total opposite of what I was feeling inside. And there was music playing over the venue, and it was this song by India Ari. And so it was this song called Ready for Love by India Ari. And I just heard this line blast over the venue, and it goes, if you gave me half a chance, I'd prove this to you. I will be patient, kind, faithful and true to a man who loves music, a man who loves art, who respects the spirit world and thinks with his heart. And I just remember having this deep sadness inside me, just knowing that this man was not, that wasn't him. And I just remember having this really strong feeling that that man that was right for me was out there somewhere. And also there's a line in that song which then became more significant later, where she sings, they say watch what you ask for, 'cause you might receive. My friend had always told me, you need somebody who's like you, like different like you, because I'd always been into the ghosts and fairies and paranormal stuff, and sometimes I told him about this and he just thought it was all bullshit. And I was artistic and I loved music, and even though for a while there I'd closed off to that whole world of the paranormal and spirit and intuition, this girl knew me, and she knew that I was different and that I needed somebody like that, who was kooky and creative and spiritual. And my karmic was just like the opposite. He's just like this totally practically minded engineer, totally closed off to anything spiritual, anything paranormal, anything creative. And to me, I'd been in denial that that was important to me. I just thought, all you need is love. It doesn't matter if we're different. As long as we love each other, like, it'll be fine. Even though I'd be pretty distraught when he would, just couldn't connect to me on that level at all. And so it was in that moment that I heard that line from that song that I knew that I was making the wrong decision. And I just smiled and pretended, and I didn't tell anybody what I was feeling inside. And it was kind of like, show must go on. And so I finished my makeup and I said I do. And And again, I just thought, no, like, this isn't the end of the story. He's going to learn to open up more. This is going to change. It's all okay. And let's just make the most of this still. So we were living together already, and a doctor had told me, it said, yep, you've got endometriosis, so you probably are not going to be able to have kids. But even so, if you can, it's going to take a long time. So I would start trying now, because it could be years down the line. And so I didn't really have any other plans in my life. As I said, I had chronic fatigue, so the plan of becoming a working musician just wasn't going to be a reality. And so we just thought, oh well, whatever, what the hell, why don't we just try? We kind of spontaneously decided to book in our wedding venue. So hey, why don't we just try for a baby? It's going to be ages anyway, and like maybe other stuff will come up. And but anyway, I also took sugar out of my diet at that point, because I could not bear the unbearable period pains and everything. And oh my god, what a difference that made. My periods just regulated, and I fell pregnant on the first shot. So that was it. This was a new chapter of my life. I was having a baby now, and little did I know how exhausting that would be, like using the chronic fatigue as an excuse not to go off and live my life out there, and thinking that having a baby was an easy option. Oh my gosh. So I had this baby, and then it became obvious that I could not micromanage his finances and take care of a baby. I also had a really traumatic experience in the hospital after having this baby. And it sent me into a spin, and I went back into full-on depression, postnatal depression, and there was no way I was going to manage having this first baby, which like hit me like a ton of bricks, and manage my own emotional, mental issues, and be micromanaging, you know, his lunch money and whatnot. So I felt I had no choice but to give him back access to his bank account and his cards and everything. And he was kind of okay-ish at that point, because he was excited about having the new baby, and that was kind of giving him a distraction away from his own issues, whereas for me, I was struggling a lot. So there was a few relapses for him with his gambling, and I was freaking out. Now we had this new life to take care of, and to think that we may have to deal with the gambling again, that was terrifying. And then we had an opportunity to travel for his work, and so that kind of distracted away from all of that, and we started planning for this trip. And we went over to live in Belgium for 7 months. And while we were there, I had a lot of meltdowns, because while it was incredible, I had to do all the planning, because we couldn't really just go on, you know, the touristy sort of little day trip type things, organized things, because we had a 2-year-old with us. We had to kind of run to our own schedule and make it work for us, so, and not have to keep up with a group or anything. And so I had to plan everything myself, and I wanted the opportunity to go to as many countries as possible. And so I was having to figure out all the transport systems and accommodation and all the sites and how to get from point A to B, C, D, blah, 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 blah. And once again, anything I asked him to handle, he just ignored it. and didn't do it. So we missed out on some of the trips that I put a lot of energy into planning. And so I was just really feeling like he was not a very supportive partner, sort of not pulling his weight. And I found the emotional labor of becoming a parent extremely overwhelming. Just breastfeeding, constant sleep deprivation, having my entire body and my everything sort of taken away from me in a way. It was really full on to come to terms with that and to deal with that. It was amazing, but it was also challenging. And so while we were over there, I just started to break down. I just wasn't coping physically, mentally, emotionally. And I said, I just need more support. Like, and if I don't get it, I'm just gonna get sick. Like I could feel myself getting sick. And I remember this day just saying, I know I'm gonna end up in hospital if this continues. Like, this is not sustainable. I can't cope. And basically we ended up going home, and I had wanted another baby, and the trip to Europe had kind of come up and delayed things. So I was a little bit worried about the age gaps and everything, and felt like time was ticking and I needed to do this. And I definitely didn't just want one baby. I wanted my kids to have siblings, and I'd always dreamt of having 2 babies. So I felt like I needed to get on with that part and just have baby 2, even though I was struggling, and even though, you know, his gambling stuff wasn't resolved. So it kind of would make the stakes even higher to have another baby, relying on him to be our security and to be able to manage that money so that we did have enough for living expenses. And so I got ready to have another baby and fell pregnant, and then it was at exactly 20 weeks pregnant that I woke to the worst pain I think I've ever experienced. And very soon in emergency learnt that I had gallstones, and subsequent to that it had caused acute pancreatitis. And they told me that this was very life-threatening to myself and the baby. And that began the next chapter of my adventure. And so I will talk about that one in the next video. So yeah, tune in then, and much love and light until next time.